In a small village called Makanda, dust covered everything like a second skin. Every morning, a little girl named Amal walked barefoot for miles with a cracked yellow bucket in her hand. The sun was hot and the road was rough, but she didn't stop. When she reached the brown stream, she bent down and scooped the muddy water carefully, trying not to spill a drop. The other children laughed from the hill, calling her Swamp Child. Their laughter stung, but Amal just smiled. She knew her mother was waiting at home to cook, and this water, no matter how dirty, was all they had. Years passed. Amal studied harder than anyone else in her school. She dreamed of a day when no child would have to drink from a swamp. When she grew up, she left Makanda with nothing but that same yellow bucket and a promise to change her village's story. After years of struggle and sleepless nights, she built something no one thought possible, Aquarise Africa, the first clean water company to reach every home in her village. On the day of the launch, Amal stood on a bright city stage, microphones flashing, cameras everywhere. Her voice was steady as she spoke about her dream, clean water for every child. When she stepped off the stage, the crowd parted. The same children who once mocked her now held bottles of clear water with her name printed on them. For a moment, no one spoke, only smiles and the sound of hope being poured. Amal grew up in a small, sunburnt village where every drop of water came from a rusty old drum near the edge of the fields. The water smelled like metal, and every sip burned her throat, but she had no choice. Her mother always said, "Don't let this taste be your future." Those words stayed with Amal, echoing in her mind each time she lifted that tin cup. She didn't understand it then, but her mother's voice was shaping her destiny. One year, when Amal was still young, a cholera outbreak swept through the village. Her little brother, who had the brightest laugh in the world, got sick. There were no doctors, no medicine, and no clean water to help him. She watched helplessly as his laughter faded, replaced by silence that filled their tiny home. That day, Amal made a promise to herself. She would never let another child die because of dirty water. From that moment, her life changed. She studied by the dim light of a candle, her eyes heavy but her heart strong. During the day, she worked in the fields to help her mother pay her school fees. Every coin she earned felt like a step closer to her dream. People laughed at her, saying, "Books can't clean water," but she didn't stop. Her mother's words and her brother's memory gave her strength. When she finally won a scholarship, she left her village barefoot, carrying only a small bag and a heart full of determination. The city was loud and fast, nothing like the quiet hills of Makanda. She often went hungry, saving every bit of money she could. She studied engineering, focusing on water systems. Nights were long, and sometimes she cried, missing home and her mother's gentle voice. But each time she felt weak, she remembered her brother and whispered, "Not one more." 10 years later, the dream that started with a promise became real. Big white trucks, shining under the African sun, drove down the same dirt road she once walked as a child. On the side of each truck was the logo of her company, Aquarise Africa. The villagers ran out of their homes, shocked and amazed. The trucks stopped by the old rusty drum, and clean, clear water began to flow into brand-new metal tanks. Children danced under the falling water, splashing and laughing. Old women wept, their wrinkled hands trembling as they filled their pots with water so clear it sparkled. Amal stood quietly in the middle of it all, her face wet with tears and sunlight. She looked toward the sky and whispered, "Mama, he can rest now." The wind carried her words across the village, through the laughter and the water's soft song. For the first time in Makanda, hope didn't taste like rust, it tasted like life. Amal had come a long way from her small village in Makanda. She had seen children die from dirty water and mothers walk for miles just to fill one bucket. So when she finally created her first clean water filter using recycled parts, she believed she was ready to take her idea to the world. She dressed in her best second-hand suit, borrowed a pair of shoes that were too tight, and walked into a tall glass building in the city. Inside, men in suits sat around a shiny table. She stood before them and explained her plan: affordable water filters that could turn dirty water into something safe for every home in Africa. When she finished speaking, the room went silent for a second, and then they laughed. One man leaned back and said, "A village girl running a water company, you'll drown in debt before you float." Another smirked and added, "Maybe start with something smaller. This is business, not a charity." Their words cut deep, but Amal didn't let it show. She simply thanked them, picked up her drawings, and walked out quietly. That night she sat alone in her small apartment, tears rolling down her face. But she didn't give up. She worked every night, testing her filters over and over again. Sometimes her hands shook from exhaustion, but she kept going. She used old bottles, plastic scraps, and sand, anything she could find. Her tiny room smelled like chemicals and hope. 2 years later, a massive flood hit the city. The fancy buildings were underwater and the bottled water factories were shut down. People panicked. There was no clean water anywhere. The same government that once ignored her now had no plan, except one name that kept coming up, Amal. Her system had been tested in tough conditions before, and it worked. She received a call in the middle of the night. A government official said, "Miss Amal, we need your help." She didn't hesitate. With the small team she had built, she delivered hundreds of her filters to hospitals, shelters, and rescue centers. Within days, her filters were saving lives. The news spread quickly. Village girl solves the city's water crisis. When the floods cleared and the city began to rebuild, Amal was invited to the same office that once laughed at her. This time, the men in suits were waiting not with mockery, but with contracts worth millions. They spoke softly now, calling her Miss Amal, their tone filled with respect. She signed every paper calmly, her hands steady, her smile quiet. She didn't say much, she didn't need to. As she walked out of that building, the same one where they once told her she would drown, the sunlight hit her face. Her silent smile said everything. She had not drowned, she had taught them how to float. The morning Amal returned to Makanda. The air still smelled of dust and dry grass. The village hadn't changed much, the same cracked huts, the same children running barefoot, and the same brown stream winding through the fields. But this time, Amal didn't come with a bucket in her hand. She came in a convoy of black SUVs, the logo of her company, Aquarise Africa, painted proudly on the doors. The rumble of engines made people peek from their windows. Some villagers whispered her name in disbelief. Others shook their heads, not sure if it was really her, the girl they once called Swamp Child. The cars stopped at the edge of the same swamp where Amal had once knelt as a little girl to scoop muddy water for her mother. Now engineers in blue uniforms stepped out, carrying pipes, cables, and heavy equipment. The villagers gathered around, confused and curious. They watched as the team began digging, fitting steel pipes into the ground. No one understood what was happening. A small boy, barefoot and wide-eyed, walked closer. He tugged at Amal's dress and asked, "Auntie, what's that?" Amal knelt down, her voice gentle as she smiled at him and said, "Your new river." The boy's eyes lit up. He didn't understand the meaning of her words yet, but he could feel her kindness, her calm strength. Hours later, the engineers finished their work. Everyone stood around the pipe, waiting. Amal gave a small nod, and one of the workers turned a valve. At first, there was a loud hiss. Then a clear stream of water burst out, sparkling under the hot sun. The crowd gasped. Children ran forward, shouting and laughing, splashing each other as if it were magic. Women fell to their knees, filling their buckets, touching the water like it was holy. The same women who once mocked Amal's mother for raising a fool who dreams too big now stood in tears. One of them whispered, "She really did it." Another covered her face and sobbed, saying, "We were wrong." Amal didn't say anything. She didn't remind them of their laughter or their words. She just stood there watching her people drink, the same people who once thought she'd never leave this dusty place. The water reflected the sky, clean and bright. It was as if the whole village was breathing again for the first time. Her mother's old house still stood by the field, quiet and worn. Amal walked there alone, touched the wall, and whispered, "Mama, we did it." The sound of children playing echoed behind her. As the sun began to set over Makanda, the swamp was no longer a place of shame. It had become a river of life, and the girl who once fetched water from it had returned to give her village something it had never known before. Hope that would never run dry. Amal was 16 when the laughter began, the kind that cut deeper than words. That morning, she had walked for miles under the blazing sun to fetch a bucket of water before school. The water was muddy, thick and warm, but it was all her family had. She carried it carefully, balancing the cracked bucket on her head as she made her way to class. But as she stepped into the schoolyard, tired and dizzy, her foot slipped. The bucket fell and the brown water splashed across the dusty ground. For a moment there was silence, then laughter exploded. "You drink mud and dream of the city?" one boy shouted. "You'll never leave here," another sneered. Even the teacher smiled faintly, shaking his head. The humiliation burned hotter than the sun. Amal felt her face flush with shame as she stared at the water soaking into the dirt. She wanted to scream, to disappear, but she said nothing. She picked up her empty bucket and walked home slowly, each step heavier than the last. That night, she cried in silence. Her mother found her sitting in the corner, holding the bucket tightly like it was her only friend. "Let them laugh," her mother said softly. One day they'll drink from your hands. Those words became a fire inside her. From that day, Amal studied harder than anyone else. She read by candlelight, sometimes by the moon, refusing to let her tears drown her dream. Years passed. She left the village to study engineering, focused on water systems. The world was not kind. People doubted her, funding was scarce, and nights were long and lonely. But Amal didn't forget the laughter. It pushed her forward. Every failure, every rejection reminded her of that muddy puddle and those mocking faces. And every time she felt like giving up, she told herself, they'll see. One day they'll see. That day finally came. 15 years later, the people of Makanda gathered near the school gates, the same place where she once spilled her bucket. This time, huge trucks lined the road, unloading metal pipes and water tanks. The children, wearing bright uniforms, watched in awe as clean water gushed out of a new tap for the first time. Above the gate, a massive billboard showed Amal's face, smiling, confident, unstoppable. The words beneath it read, "Aquarize Africa, clean water for every child." The headmaster, now old and frail, stood quietly by the fence. He looked up at the billboard and whispered, "She really did it." Some of the same classmates who had laughed years ago stood in the crowd, their eyes full of regret. Amal didn't hold grudges. She didn't need to. She had turned their laughter into purpose. As the sun set over Makanda, children filled their bottles with clear, cool water. Amal stood nearby watching them drink. Her face, once wet with tears, now glowed with pride. The whole village laughed again, but this time the sound was pure joy. Amal's mother had always been her strength, soft voice, tired eyes, and hands that never stopped working. Every morning she would kneel by the muddy stream outside their home, using a torn piece of cloth to filter the brown water before pouring it into a pot. One evening, when the sun dipped behind the hills and the air smelled of rain, her mother called her close. Her voice was weak, her breath short. She held Amal's hand and whispered, "Promise me one thing, bring back clean water." Those words became a fire that never went out. Even after her mother passed, Amal could still hear her voice every time she closed her eyes. When she left Makanda for university, she carried nothing but that promise. Life in the city was hard. She had no family there, no comfort, no money. Some nights she slept hungry, eating only instant noodles, saving every coin she could. But she studied harder than anyone else. She chose engineering because she wanted to understand water, to control it, to make it pure. After graduation, she started working on her dream. She built small filters in her tiny apartment, using bottles, sand, and charcoal. She tested every design with shaky hands and tired eyes. Most of them failed, but she never stopped. People told her it was impossible. "You're just a village girl," they said. "No one will invest in you." But Amal had made a promise, and she wasn't going to break it. When the time finally came to meet investors, she walked into the room with her heart pounding. The men and women around the long table looked powerful, their eyes cold and calculating. She placed her small prototype on the table and took a deep breath. Her voice trembled at first, not from fear but from memory. "My mother used to clean dirty water with her hands," she said. "She died believing that one day her daughter would bring clean water to her village." The room went silent. No one moved, no one whispered. Her words hung in the air, heavy and real. When she finished speaking, one of the toughest investors, a man known for never showing emotion, leaned forward and simply said, "How much do you need?" That moment changed everything. With their support, Amal built her company, Aquarize Africa. She worked day and night, turning her promise into a movement. A year later, a line of shiny white trucks drove into Makanda, each carrying clean, safe water. The villagers ran out of their homes, cheering and crying. The sound of water pouring into the tanks filled the air like music. Amal stood apart from the crowd, her eyes glistening. She looked up at the sky where the clouds were glowing with sunset light and whispered softly, "I did it, Mama." In that moment, the promise she once made with trembling hands had finally come true, and the whole village was drinking her mother's dream. The day the billionaire arrived in Makanda, the whole village gathered to see him. His convoy of shining black cars stretched down the dusty road, engines humming like a swarm of bees. The man had come with cameras, security guards, and reporters following every step. He smiled for the cameras, shaking hands and promising to change lives. But for Amal, who stood at the back of the crowd with dust on her dress and determination in her eyes, something about his words felt empty. She had seen men like him before, rich people who donated for headlines, not for hearts. As the billionaire walked toward the old stream where children still fetched dirty water, Amal stepped forward. The crowd went silent. She looked him straight in the eye and said, "Sir, your system is broken." A few people gasped. The billionaire turned to her, surprised, and gave a short laugh. "And what would you know about systems?" he asked, his tone half amused, half mocking. She didn't flinch. "I know what it's like to drink mud," she said quietly, "and I know how to make it clean." The cameras turned toward her. Reporters began whispering. The billionaire smirked, ready to move on, but Amal pulled out her tablet and showed him her data, months of research, test results, and field studies. Then she walked him to a small machine she had built herself. It was made from recycled materials and powered by solar energy. She filled it with muddy water, pressed a button, and moments later, clear water flowed out. The crowd gasped again, this time in awe. The billionaire stared at the water, his smile gone. "Who built this?" he asked softly. "I did," Amal replied, "without your money." The video of that moment spread like wildfire online. People everywhere started talking about the village girl who challenged a billionaire. News channels replayed the clip over and over, her calm voice, her unshaken confidence, and the billionaire's stunned face. Within days, she became a symbol of courage and innovation. A year later, the same billionaire requested a meeting with her. He wanted to invest in her company, Aquarise Africa, offering millions to join forces. This time, Amal walked into his glass office in the city, dressed in a white suit, head held high. The billionaire greeted her politely, his tone much softer now. "Miss Amal," he said, "we'd like to offer you a partnership." Amal smiled, calm and confident. "You laughed when I drank dirty water," she said gently. "Now you can drink my success." The billionaire didn't argue, he just nodded. The video of that moment, her words, her grace, her power, went viral again. 30 million views in one night. Around the world, people called her the woman who made the rich listen. But to Amal, it wasn't about fame. It was about proving that no amount of money could buy the strength of a girl who once drank from the mud and decided to change it forever. The world expected Amal to celebrate her success in a grand hotel, champagne, gold lights, and famous guests. After all, Aquarise Africa had just become a billion-dollar company, the first of its kind built by a girl who once fetched muddy water. But Amal didn't want any of that. On the morning of the celebration, she quietly left the city and drove back to Makanda, her village, the place where everything began. The air was warm and dusty, just like she remembered. The same brown swamp still sat at the edge of the village, the one she used to bend over as a child, scooping water with trembling hands. Now, she stood there in clean shoes, holding a silver bottle filled with clear water from her company's plant. Behind her were a few journalists, some of her team members, and curious villagers who had come to see what was happening. Without saying a word, Amal walked to the swamp, bent down, and poured a single drop of clean water into the muddy stream. Slowly, she emptied the bottle, and the clear water mixed with the brown. Children gathered around, eyes wide with wonder. One little boy cupped his hands under the new stream, took a sip, and whispered, "It tastes like rain." Amal laughed softly, her eyes shining with tears. "No," she said, "it tastes like hope." Cameras clicked all around her, capturing that moment, the girl who once drank dirt now giving her people life. The photo spread across the world that day. People called it the smile that changed Africa. But to Amal, it wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about keeping her promise and turning pain into something pure.